Now, Russia and China have agreed to help each other increase their clout in global affairs. At a meeting in Moscow, Vladimir Putin and the Chinese Vice President Xi Jinping hailed the strength of ties between the two and said economic and political relations had never been better. Well, let's get an expert's assessment now and talk to Martin Hennecke, an Associate Director at the Hong Kong investment and financial advice firm Thaik. Hello to you. You've said that Western economies are not really showing any great signs of recovery. Do you think China and Russia could forge a counterbalance to the power of the West?
Definitely, that's my personal great hope, and even for investors I think that should be a very great hope, because as you rightly said, the Western economies don't not even just look as they're not recovering very fast, but in fact their financial systems are at risk of real disintegration. You have been, of course, following what happens with Greece recently, but Greece is just the tip of the iceberg of similar fundamental problems across the whole Eurozone. Spain is going to follow, Italy is going to follow, and nobody could possibly bail them out. Even if the IMF was going to bail out Greece, what they normally, the maximum amount they would normally lend to countries would just last Greece until about June this year. So there's going to be a very interesting time coming. And even if bilateral loans from the supposedly stronger countries like France and Germany are going to be given, it will put a lot more pressure on them, and interest rates on their sovereign bonds are probably going to rise. So we think that, the 2008 financial crisis hasn't been fixed at all, but it's just been transferred from the balance sheet of the banks to the balance sheet of the governments, and now the government debt is going to be the next major crisis in the West across Europe, the UK and the United States. So clearly China is a hope there, and some other developing markets also look much healthier than the Western economies, often lower government debt. Even Russia looks fundamentally healthier in terms of the government debt and deficit picture than some of the Western economies, where people normally think that's much lower risk than the developing economies. So China also has a very low government debt ratio of about 30%. Some say if you count in the States it's a bit higher, but still clearly a lot better than the West, and the industry is very strong. So one would very much hope that Russia does look towards China for the future and for future development, rather than hoping of a supposed great quick recovery from the West.
Yes, you mentioned financial systems there. Moscow and Beijing also see each other as partners in efforts to limit the world's reliance on the dollar. Is it possible the greenback may be ditched anytime soon, in your opinion?
Well, you have been seeing actually China has been selling the greenback lately. Before they have been considering to, maybe rebalance some of the euro holdings with euros. Now, obviously, they're quite wary of the euro. Also, Greece actually asked them if they could bail out Greece, but they said it's a European problem. So I think China knows quite well what's happening within Europe now as well. So they have been looking at gold, and then, maybe promoting their own currency and maybe some developing market currencies as an alternative, and also having bilateral currency trades with other developing markets. So definitely, I think with the way the deficits are going in the US in February, another record 220 billion. That's an all-time high there, and cost to post another 1.6 trillion for this year. That's about 11% budget deficit. Normally, as you may know, when the Eurozone was formed, 3% budget deficit is considered the maximum sustainable. So definitely, I think, one needs to work towards this cooperation within Asian and developing market countries to look beyond what would happen if there was a massive dollar crisis. And just by being around and being reasonably stable, in our view, the renminbi as such in particular could vastly appreciate against the West. Whether or not it's from pressure from the US, but simply by being reasonably stable, as the Western currencies may go into hyperinflation, the Eastern currencies and precious metals could increase quite substantially.
So obviously China is rapidly rising as a world economic and political power. Do you think Russia would have any concerns about that?
Well, I would recommend Russia not to be overly concerned, because it's a great hope, a great opportunity. I mean, so far China has been a very peaceful country. They haven't really attacked, as some Western powers, which I don't want to name here, but, China has actually been a very peaceful country internationally. They have been promoting trade and development rather than bringing war to other countries. A good example, the railway project is not just for their own country. I mean, this big railway expansion program, some say it's a big bubble, but actually they're desperately needed. I mean, China currently moves 24% of the world's rail traffic, but they've only got 6% of the world's rail tracks. So they're already 4 times as busy, their rail system, than the average in the world. So they desperately need this, but they also want to spread this throughout Asia. They have proposed rail links to Russia and other areas, and I think they also understand that Russia doesn't just want to continue selling raw materials to China, but there are other areas of integration as well. So I think Russia should not be viewing it as a concern, but rather maybe a regional rebalance of power to counter some of the Western powers, and again as a hope of integration and future progress.
Okay, interesting stuff. Martin Hennecke from the Hong Kong Investment and Financial Advice from Thaik. Thank you very much for joining us here.